the super objectives of the Xenogears characters. I grew up saying Xenogears. It makes more sense to say Xenogears, but I'm going to accidentally say Xenogears a few times.
Xenogears is how the Japanese would say it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's technically correct.
Hey there, I'm Michael. I'm a classically trained composer, and I'm also a really big video game lover. I especially love JRPGs. A lot of times I like to take the formal analysis ideas I got from my education and include them in analysis and review videos of video games and popular music. That's basically what happens here on I Love This Blank. I wanted to make a series of analysis videos on Xenogears, incorporating music and Stanislavskian analysis. Check out this old video for an in-depth description of that Stanislavskian analysis, but there's also a short description toward the end of this video that you're about to watch. In order to do this Stanislavskian analysis, I need to have a full idea of each of the characters' super objectives, or SOs, in mind before I start. A super objective is what the character mostly wants throughout the entire run of the piece of media. But I don't know this game inside and out like I do with Final Fantasy VI, the last game I did this process with, so I decided to enlist some help. I asked Branden of Just the Gems and TJ of TJ the Emperor to have a chat with me and work through these SOs. Just a quick warning, this is a spoiler-heavy video, so if you've not played the game and you don't like spoilers, you probably shouldn't watch this until you have played the game, or at least until you've watched all of my streams, which are forthcoming. Now let's go on to past Michael in a different purple shirt, chatting with Branden and TJ.
Bloop boop boo. Bloop doop doo. Bloop doop da boo.
I pulled a pretty big group of characters that we could talk about. We can probably just skip through and get the important ones. I wanted to sort of acknowledge how difficult this would be for each of the characters themselves to have their own motivations, but also like the motivations that are programmed into them in a way, which in some cases are the same thing, in some cases are not. What I'm looking for here is what we think the main thing that Bart wants in the game. What does he want to accomplish by the end of the game?
If we're going chronologically through the story, right? He starts out in a position of, exile, sort of guerrilla style warfare, almost like punching back. And he achieves that main goal prior to the end of the game, right? Like reclaiming the nation.
Right. His goal from most of his arc is to reclaim the throne of Ave, which he does partway through disc 1.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think if after that, if he has a unique goal for himself aside from, the rest of the story. I don't know. I mean, maybe I'd have to think about it though.
Without having the text of it all in front of me, I feel like his goal is achieved and he's continuing with the group sort of as a, you did me a favor, I'll do you a favor kind of deal. Like there's an obligation. And then of course, just friendship and camaraderie, right? Like he's not going to just jump ship now that he got what he wanted. His main goal from a story perspective, his personal goal was achieved prior to the end of the game. So yeah, I mean, that feels correct.
That's what I've noticed about doing this process with Final Fantasy VI. Most of the characters in Final Fantasy VI achieve their goal at some point in the World of Ruin, and then they all have this extra goal of defeating Kefka at the end of the game. I think it makes sense that they would all achieve their goals at different times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, particularly like Kefka's actually very similar to like the Deus situation, where we have something that is ultimately going to lead to everyone's death and destruction. It would be a cop-out to say that everyone's end goal is to save themselves and the rest of humanity, because that's the kind of they have to.
Right, yeah.
So yeah, everybody's goal, once they achieve their personal goal, I guess, shifts to, well, this is also important. We better take care of this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's in the world's best interest, and by extension in their best interest too, because they're part of the world.
What does Billy actually want?
Let's see. I mean, he starts off as an agent of the Ethos religion organization, fairly devout, and then there comes that whole scene near the end of disc 1 where basically I can't remember who it was. It was they discover the computer, and they and basically has like that Ethos is basically a front for Solaris and their whatever they're doing on Earth.
Right.
And that sort of that sort of shatters his worldview and his whole reason for doing everything. And honestly, one of my criticisms of the story is that Billy kind of falls to the wayside after that whole revelation happens, like this huge thing. And then like the game could if it wanted to spend like all this time sort of exploring that, but I mean I understand that there's a lot more ground that they had to cover, so I guess some stuff had to be left to the wayside. But Billy's kind of art kind of gets forgotten about a little bit.
Yeah, I think maybe it very well could be that they had more plans for him if they had been able to spend more time like in the second disc situation than they ended up being able to. I think you can infer a lot about what his feelings and his personal goals might be. Like if your worldview is upended like that, all of a sudden it could be that you want some kind of revenge for that. So Solaris put him through all this for nothing. Basically, it all meant nothing. I want revenge for that. So like I do think that in Billy's situation, it's the onus is more on you as the person playing the game to kind of infer that. I'm sure that wasn't what they intended. They didn't want ultimately for you to have to do that, but yeah, call it headcanon, call it whatever, but that's kind of how I've thought about it.
Yeah, and once Bishop Stone is no longer in the picture, like he sort of takes down his mentor who was not who he thought he was, and that's sort of a closure. But I had another thought about Billy. It does seem like he has a pretty strong dedication to his sister and to the other kids at the orphanage.
That's true. Yeah.
And caring for them is probably an important part. He doesn't specifically talk about it as much, but we see it a lot. And the one scene where he's on the Yggdrasil, I can't remember who he's talking with about what he had to go through to support his sister when they were really young.
Oh, right. When his father left them.
Yeah.
And there's the whole series of flashbacks that I think that's a very easy inference to make there.
Yeah.
His relationship with Jesse is sort of unresolved as well, I feel. Maybe I'm just not remembering correctly, but I don't remember there being a Billy and Jesse resolution.
Yeah, Jesse shows up a little bit in disc 2, but it wasn't for that long, and I don't remember like and I don't even remember if Billy and Jesse actually speak like together in disc 2. I want to say no, but that seems incorrect.
I don't remember. It's been so long since I've played the game.
Yeah, my last playthrough was like, I want to say 4 years ago. So
mine was like 2 or 3 years ago. So it's a bit fresher, but those little details,
Related. I kind of wish there were more of a conversation around the elements and who they were and who they are now, and maybe have them interact with each other. But
I mean, honestly, like I do share that sentiment, but there, like some of the richness of the implications that exist in Xenogears are one of the things I just find really appealing about it. Is like there is obviously so much more to the world, and it's constructed in such a way that you get little glimpses of it, and then your imagination has to fill in the gaps. And that's like something that's a feeling I chase in every new game that I play. I'm like, oh, I hope that there's something like that. And that started with Xenogears, honestly. So
I don't know if we have to spend a lot of time on him since he's not as important of a character overall, but I think he's interesting.
He's interesting because he has a 10,000 year goal he's been trying to attain.
It's easy to think at first. I think that Cain and the Gazel Mystery have the same goal, but they are at odds with each other by at least midpoint of the game. And I don't quite get why.
I want to say that they did have the same goal at one point, but then Kane went off on his own. And I'm trying to think of like when it was that him and the Gazelle Ministry would have diverged. It might have been before the game started. Actually, I think it was, because like it was pretty early on in the game where you see Kane and Shaitan having one of their conversations. And so obviously they would have been on the same page already. So it must have been before the game started, but exactly when, I'm not sure.
I'm fine with letting that one just sort of dangle as a question, and maybe I can figure it out in my playthrough.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to be cutting in occasionally. Branden, TJ, and I were on a pretty short timeline to get our discussion completed, so I ended up skipping a few characters that I thought were less important or that I thought I could just cover myself. The first of these is Choo Choo, and I will be popping in with a few other descriptions like this. Choo Choo is not a super complicated character. Choo Choo is the animal friend comedic relief character. Thankfully, she's not in a ton of the game, because when she is there, she's pretty annoying. But as such, she doesn't have a really developed super objective. Her super objective just seems to be a romantic relationship with Faye. Let's talk about Shaitan, or Satan as I'm used to saying. But I know the etymological reason for calling him Shaitan. He's another interesting one, because his goals could be exactly the same as Kane's, or they could be different and he's just pretending to go along with Kane. I think it's clear that he cares about Faye.
Right.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And is not just treating him as a research subject.
Right, he's not using him.
For sure.
Like, that's an interesting question, though. Like, Shaitan and Kane, like, are they 100% on the same side? I want to say no. Like, my gut instinct is to say no, but then you're going to ask, like, where's the evidence? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I have to think about that.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel the same way, though. If his goals were just the same as Kane's, why would he stick with the party after they're all in Solaris together?
Right. He still opposes what Solaris is trying to do. Whereas Kane opposes the ministry, but does he still think of himself as like, the head of Solaris? Like, did you get what I'm saying? Like, yeah.
I feel like their goals overlap in significant ways, and that's why he's able to, continue to support Kane for an extended period of time, basically till Kane's gone, right?
Right.
And then after Kane's gone, he's kind of free to just join the party fully and do whatever he wants. He has no obligations anymore. So I do think they both want humanity to survive, right? Like they're not looking for the bad end. So
right. I think Shaitan is just trying to get humanity to survive and thrive without Solaris as overseers.
Yeah, and not to bring it back to Final Fantasy VI, but I think this is something that could actually make it make sense. What if the Gazelle Ministry is sort of like the Kafka goal? They just want to destroy or become part of God, and Kane actually wants power to just continue ruling, and then that could make Shaitan different in that he's aligning himself with Kane while it's convenient to do so. But then he wants to actually like free humanity from its shackles.
Right.
Yeah.
It's hard because I don't know if we really know what, like, if the game ever says what Kane's end goal was.
Right.
Or if he died, if Krellian killed him before that was ever laid out in the open.
Yeah, and I'm also trying to think if Shaitan explicitly or even implicitly ever was shown acting against Kane in any way. Like even just like in his like expressed desires. And I can't think of anything. Doesn't mean it didn't happen, but
I can't remember him acting against Kane specifically. I remember him the whole journey through Solaris was, to me very much like, we need to stop this. You know what I mean? So in that sense, but against Kane specifically, I don't think so.
Cutting in again to talk about Deus. Deus is not a fully rational being. It doesn't consciously want anything. It is programmed, it's conditioned, it works on instinct. And this programming, this conditioning, makes it want to grow and destroy. And that's it. Ellie has a lot of layers because there's the actual current day Ellie, and there's all of the anti-type, and there's even some specifically Sophia that comes out in her.
Right.
They do all converge by the end of the game. They all want the same thing. But I think if we're looking just at Ellie, it seems from my recollection that a lot of what she's doing is trying to like prove herself and secure her place and fit in with her family, with the role that's expected of her. And then when that becomes not possible with her found family, and then that it gets expanded to the whole world.
Right.
Yeah, I was thinking along similar lines that she wants normalcy, what normalcy means for her as somebody from Solaris. Like, that's her ultimate goal. And she's unfortunately like Destiny's child, right? Like she doesn't really
Right.
have a choice.
Yeah, she tries to find her place within the context of the society of Solaris, but she keeps failing. And then it takes it takes Faye really to sort of snap her out of that and tell her like, what are you doing? Like almost like this is never going to end well if you keep trying this.
Right.
Yeah, she goes to a lot of lengths earlier in the game to not disrupt her own status quo, but it seems like with the question of, who her parents actually are, she has to work a little bit harder to fit in.
Right.
I do want to cut in again here and talk specifically about the anti-type and Sophia, since we only talked just about the current iteration of Ellie in our discussion. The anti-type's main goal is always to protect the contact. So in this current iteration, to protect Faye. Now, Sophia also has this drive to protect, but her feeling becomes more personal and also gets stretched to being something that includes all of humanity, pretty much. This is what Ellie inherits from Sophia. She might have also developed it herself, and other antitypes might have developed it themselves. We don't know that for sure, but we do know at least that Sophia and the current iteration of Ellie have this desire. This desire to protect everyone is what drives Sophia to sacrifice herself. But this protective urge could also include her urge to protect Lacan, the contact in her timeline, and allow him to escape and live on through her death.
Yeah, she just likes Faye's Kim.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just like Ellie, there's so many different layers of Faye. And let's not include Id for the purpose of this discussion.
It is his own, it could be his own thing. I mean, I think when the game starts, Faye kind of wants, like you were saying, how Ellie just wants normalcy. Like Faye is kind of the same way to a more extreme degree, because the only world that he knows at that point is like, the idyllic kind of village existence, him living in Lahan and running up to Shatan's house to borrow like a camera or something. Like that's what his life was, and that's sort of all he wanted. And then we all know what happened. The village gets destroyed, and he's like, oh my god, why do I have to be involved in this? Why can't things go back to how they were before, even though that's impossible?
Yeah.
And I think sort of an extra wrinkle to that is all Faye knows is his life in Lahan, but that's only a couple years long, right? He was...
Is it 3 years or something?
Like
it was
that.
3 years, yeah.
I don't remember if he says anything specifically about it. I think he does when he's talking to Alice a little bit at the beginning, but like he doesn't really know who he is or where he came from, and that seems to be part of the question of his... But like there can be more. There can be sort of multiple objectives that sort of feed into each other. And I think that TJ, your idea of him fitting in and finding his place means like actually finding it or finding where he came from is part of that.
Yeah, the place that he hoped to make his home, his life, wasn't going to work out. Wasn't working out. Sorry, bro. We got to let you go. So then his goal shifts to finding a place to belong kind of more broadly. And I mean, I feel like everything kind of revolves around that to an extent. He has lots of, more immediate goals depending on where they're at in the story. But at the end of the day, that's like he's chasing that feeling, that desire pretty much until the end.
Gazel Ministry, we kind of talked about them a little bit, but is there anything more that we want to say?
They're pretty consistent throughout the whole game, I feel.
Yeah, they're just what they were programmed to be, basically.
Right, exactly, yeah.
And even before they became a computer, they were still programmed to be this.
Yeah, I mean, that's literally why they were created.
I think with Graf, we do need to include Lacan.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just a straight line.
Yeah.
That's the epitome of like Billy to the extreme, right? Where it's like everything you fought for, believed in, ripped away, and just like this bitter husk left behind.
Although I would say that like the difference is that like I would say, Billy, he joins the ethos, like, the ethos is sort of this pre-existing thing, whereas Lacan kind of builds up Sophia to be this sort of semi-divine being. Like that's almost his own doing.
Yeah.
Like he kind of deifies her on his own.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought of that.
Which might make it even like, I don't know, that might make it even harder for him to come to terms with that once she's dead. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. His own God he created and then saw that failed him, basically, or he failed her, however he views it, right?
Right. And his whole thing after that was like, this didn't work, or like this God or whatever was a lie. So screw the world. I'm just going to destroy everything.
Let's burn it all down. Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
I can't remember where I read this. It might be on the Wikipedia that Graf's true aim is to reconnect with the wave existence.
Well, I think he says something about that, doesn't he? He says something about that at some point. Where I mean that's kind of how he that initial connection or whatever was how he became what he is, right? How Lacan is able to continue existing while Faye is still, being reborn as Faye.
Right.
So maybe having tasted that pure existence, like that's the only thing as a husk, right? As a shell, basically, of a person. Yeah. That's the ultimate desire, is to exist.
Right. And that is kind of where Graf ends, at the end, at the end of disc 2. Like, I mean, everyone kind of converges where the Zohar is in the wave existence. And I'm trying to remember if Graf was going out of his way to look for it, though. And I don't remember that.
I'll keep an eye out for that in my playthrough.
Yeah.
But that's definitely a question that I had.
Yeah, I feel like the game, like, that was in that part of the game. I just don't remember the details.
Another one we didn't have a chance to talk about much is Hammer. I think Hammer's super objective is a pretty common one among the cast of Xenogears. Hammer wants to be useful, and he wants to be respected. This sort of gets warped into craving power, but ultimately, he wants people to respect him. It's probably going to be pretty easy because it's more just, again, like Kefka, the urge to destroy different reasons, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But because of how he became the one who shouldered the burden for the rest of Faye's psyche, it was easy for Groff to manipulate him to become that.
Yeah, because he's basically programmed to think that the world is this evil. I mean, like Groff kind of imparts his worldview onto id wholesale. Because it is this, I mean, it is receptive to that sort of doctrine at that point.
Cutting in again to talk about Jesse. Jesse's an interesting one that we spent some time talking about while we were talking about Billy, but we didn't really talk about why Jesse neglected his family. Jesse's goal is to take down Solaris, and he's willing to go to any length to do that, including neglecting his family if necessary. I think he probably didn't want to neglect his family, but in choosing the more important goal to him, taking down Solaris, he loses his family, which does not make his situation any easier. It still wounds his psyche, and he is driven to drink because of that. And yeah, that leads to some tensions with his older child, Billy, obviously.
I mean, Krellian is sort of like, I mean, him and Lacan are kind of parallels, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
Lacan, they both lost Sophia. Lacan became Groff and wants to burn the world down, but Krellian, he still has faith that he can like create a new god or find a new god. Like, it's a twisted kind of faith, but it's there.
Mm-hmm.
That desire to create that is sort of like, he remains pretty constant throughout the game too, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It might be interesting that Lacan and Groff want to have that connection with the god that is the wave existence, but Krellian kind of wants to have the connection with this idea of God that is in Deus.
Does Krellian know that the wave existence is a thing?
I have no idea.
Yeah,
it's not clear whether it's ever spoken to him.
I feel like the only people that do are the ones who have contacted it directly.
So the contact and...
Right. Yeah, Ellie would know, and Lacan went back to... Yeah, like the only those who experienced it like directly know, but again, I could be wrong about that too.
There might be something in that scene in the lab with Krellian and Ellie toward the end of the game, possibly, but I don't remember.
Oh, the one in his lab in
Solaris,
Solaris. Yeah. He mentions a lot of stuff. I don't think it was, well, because he talks about like I don't think he calls it the Miang factor, but it's basically that when he's analyzing Ellie, but I don't think he really knows. I think at that point he just thinks like, oh, this is like, what is this, what does this mean? He doesn't know what it means yet, I don't think.
I think you're right. To talk about Margie is a little bit tough because she is so young that it's almost as if she hasn't fully developed her own consciousness in order to know what she really wants. I think like so many characters in this game, she wants to feel like a part of something. She feels her duty toward her religion, and that's important to her, but it feels like she doesn't completely understand what that entails yet. She knows what the scriptures say, but she does also have this desire to be with Bart. I think that desire is potentially misinterpreted as a romantic desire because it's written in the scripture, this is what should happen, but she also wants to be connected to Bart, and that's one way. That might just be me projecting a little bit. Let me know in the comments if you think anything different. Similar to Margie, Maria is not a super well-developed character, but as so many of the characters in this game are looking for family in some sort, Maria really is just looking for a connection with her father. That is her family. That's all that she knows of her family. Well, she knows her grandfather exists, but I don't know how close they are. But she really wants to be with her father. That's the main thing that she wants.
And Miang is another one who's, I mean, she's been programmed like literally from day one to do the same thing, which is like resurrect Deus, basically, right?
Right.
Yeah. Converge. everyone, everything.
Yeah.
Who would you say is the true final boss of the game, or the true, like, maybe not final boss, but who is the ultimate villain of the game, the big bad?
I would say Miang is.
Yeah, I was
probably.
leaning towards Miang just because her desire is the most purely destructive. Even if it's not, you could argue it's not even the most evil. Like, all of the villains are very gray, which is something I appreciate about Xenogears. But even the
Right.
horrible things that Krellian did, there's some element to it that you can understand, whereas Miang is almost animalistic, almost just
Right.
instinctive.
Yeah, I would say that Miang is totally like irredeemable as far as what she does.
Mhm.
Like Miang doesn't elicit that sort of sympathetic response,
Right.
as opposed to like, Krellian is a good example of this. It's like he's a monster, but it's like somewhere deep down, like I get what he's doing. Like
Yeah.
Miang is just was almost like a force of nature almost.
That's exactly right. Like we could say that what she does is evil, but it almost transcends that. It's just like you can't get
beyond
mad.
good and evil.
Yeah, it's like you can't get mad at a bear for attacking, something and eating. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's just nature. It's just
Right.
like what it is supposed to do.
Right.
It's a little more complicated because obviously Miang has intelligence, has like the ability to
Right.
communicate. She's not an animal in that sense, but she is behaving the most instinctually out of all of the characters.
And in a way, her intelligence is her superpower, because the intelligence that she clearly carries from version of herself to version of herself, whereas the other people who are constantly reborn, it takes them a while to get that knowledge. She comes in immediately having it.
Yeah, that's the difference between like her versus, the contact and the anti-type. Like I don't know if the game specifies this, but it doesn't seem like it's a toss-up whether they receive any of the memories from their past selves. It seems like from what little we see of like Lacan and Kim, for instance, like they're totally unaware that they were even the contact. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Thinking of who is actually evil, I think Lacan and Graf is the easiest one to point to doing evil things and choosing to do them, because a lot of the game he's just trying to basically piss Faye off enough to get him to show himself.
Right.
How much suffering can I inflict upon this one person? Ramses, another interesting one.
The most pathetic.
Yeah.
Right.
I really feel bad for him.
That's literally what I mean. Like the most pathos, like you just feel the most like God.
He was set up to fail for his whole life.
Right. That's literally his existence, is that to do one very specific thing that is not even something I'm sure would even consider on his own. But yeah, like he is the failed child that sucks to be him,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And
I think he wants to be, his goal, I guess, is to be accepted, to be
the gold star.
Yeah.
He wants to be admired in some way.
Yeah.
The only way he can, or at least in his own mind, that he thinks that he can be accepted is if Faye or Id specifically is no longer around.
Mm-hmm.
That's his one definition of acceptance, and unfortunately that's that's something that he's never going to achieve.
Yeah,
that's another thing that always has made me wonder, like going back to the elements when Shitan and Jesse were in the elements with Ramses, and he was the most revolutionary of them at the time, right? Doesn't it say that somewhere, that they all sort of like flocked to him because of his revolutionary ideas?
That is true. Yeah, I do remember them saying that.
And I don't think there's anything else said about that in the game. So I wish, that's one thing that I've always wanted to know.
Yeah, like what changed, or maybe Shitan and who else was it? Sigurd, I think. Like maybe they just left too early and they don't know what happened either.
I don't know what he actually wants. Is it just acceptance like so many of the other characters? There's so little time spent with Rico in the game.
Yeah, he feels the
his
least
detriment,
baked.
Yeah. Now I'm trying to even remember, like, when we meet him in the prison, is he like cool with just staying there and like being the battling champ for his whole life, or like, because I don't remember him wanting to like escape from that. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he was pretty happy there, or like happy in air quotes,
Yeah, he was the big dog, right? Like
right.
He wasn't eager to get out.
Right.
Yeah, I honestly don't know. I was thinking about this before we even
and
he's
like
a tough nut to crack. I don't know.
The game hints that the leader of Kislev is like his father or something. It's very brief hints, but like I'm trying to think if his goal is related to that at all, and I don't even know.
Yeah, I think that's something that the game just didn't give us enough to really get any deeper on him.
Right. I mean, I know there was mention of like he was discriminated against because he was a demi-human. The game mentions that specifically. But again, the question is, does that play into what he wants throughout the course of the game? And like, I want to say no, just because, again, like so little is done with that.
Yeah, I can't even remember like a meaningful conversation with him post Kislev the first time.
But now that has me thinking, like, I have played the Xenosaga games. I haven't played the Xenoblade games yet. But like ideas like discrimination is handled in the Xenosaga games. Is it in the Xenoblade games too?
To what I remember, not to that degree. Although to be fair, I've only played through each of the Xenoblade games once.
Same.
Whereas Xenogears, Xenosaga, I'm much more familiar with. So I am technically not the best person to.
I mean, the Xenoblades are primarily like they're war stories. So like, this group against this group. So I mean, there's that kind of discrimination, but it's within society, maybe a little bit in 2. I'm trying to think how some of the blades are treated, but not to the extent that we've seen in Gears and Saga.
Yeah.
Right.
I was only asking that because I would not be surprised if in the generation of ideas for Saga, they're like, oh, we didn't really do as much with this idea in Gears. Let's move those ideas over to these games instead.
Yeah, I could see that.
We skip to the wave existence as well, and this is actually a pretty easy one, I think. The wave existence is accidentally trapped inside the Zohar and wants to be free. Ends up going through a 10,000-year plan to free himself, but it works. Wise Man is another interesting character. Wise Man is Faye's father, Khan, when he is not controlled by Groff. Like, Khan's will is so strong that he can push Groff aside sometimes. Sort of like Faye can do with id, but it seems like Faye has more control of id most of the time, whereas Groff has more control of Khan most of the time. Anyway, Wise Man wants to protect his son, Faye, but is not showing who he really is. I think Zephyr's one of the most interesting characters.
And I didn't think about her before this started, but she is interesting. I mean, talk about like racked with guilt. I mean, her whole thing was like, she made an alliance, her and Shavat technically made an alliance with Solaris, right? 500 years ago. Not really knowing where that was going to end. And then obviously it ended with Groff becoming a thing and just, wrecking the world. And she spent all that. Is she like immortal, or how is she able to live? Like, is it nanomachines?
Nanomachines, yeah.
Of course.
Yeah, doesn't like Krellian do that to her as punishment?
Curses her with nanomachines for letting Sophia die.
Right. so she can like witness the end of the world. Yeah, she would just have to do everything she could to assuage her guilt.
Yeah. Without being able to directly interfere anymore. Well, TJ, you need to get out of here. So thanks so much for joining.
Yeah.
This was great.
Thank you for inviting me. I hope all this was helpful for you.
Brandon, do you need to get out of here too?
I've got a little bit.
I don't know if there's anything else that I really wanted to say. I just wanted to see if there's anything else that you wanted to say.
No, I mean, tell me, refresh my memory a little bit on the project, like what all you do, looking to do.
I've been sort of reframing it in my head. I initially wanted to do the same exact idea as with Final Fantasy VI and compare the super objectives of these characters and whether they're reached or not with the music. But it's a little bit harder with Xenogears because Mitsuda's music isn't as character specific as Uematsu's music is.
Right.
So I've been trying to think of exactly how I'm going to do this, but I think it's going to be looking at the scene objectives, like what's happening in this scene, what does everyone want in this scene, and thinking of how the music helps to amplify the mood, because his music is more just like setting and mood descriptive than character descriptive. Like my favorite thing that I found out about Final Fantasy VI is with Celeste on the solitary island after the suicide attempt. She finds the bird that has a handkerchief tied to it, and you hear the music Forever Rachel. And like if we're looking just at the name of the song, like why would this song about Rachel be playing? But Forever Rachel's not actually about Rachel. It's about Locke. And like on some sense, it's like the only lower energy version of Locke's theme that we have in the game, but also it's talking about how Locke feels about the important people in his life. So finding things like that is what I was hoping to be able to do in Final Fantasy, in Xenogears, but I don't think doing it exactly that way is going to work as well with Xenogears.
There's a lot of challenges, I think, with Xenogears. There's also just honestly far less music in Xenogears proportionately to Final Fantasy VI, right? Just like in terms of raw number of tracks, there's just far fewer. And you're right, it's much more macro focused and not so like character specific.
And I think there's some stuff that like when the game was being made, some people made choices and putting music where it really shouldn't have been. Like Choo Choo's transformation scene, they play Maria's music.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, thank you, Brandon.
Yeah, my pleasure. Hope it was helpful.
Yeah, I think so.
It's fun talking about this stuff in general. So, I'm always down.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for your time.
Yeah, thanks, man.
All right. Bye.
Take care. Bye.
All right. Well, that's it for this video. I want to, again, really thank Brandon and TJ for joining me in this discussion. You should really check out Brandon's stuff. He's one of the hosts of the JRPG Pursuit, and he has his own channel, Just the Gems. Both JRPG focused, really great stuff. Some of my favorite channels on YouTube. I also need to plug TJ the Emperor. His deep dives into lore on games, especially a lot of Xeno games, really excellent stuff. Highly recommend. And he is sought out by other people to talk about Xeno stuff for a reason. If you're interested in Xenogears but don't have access to a copy yourself, you'll be able to watch my streams of the game. At the time of this video being released, I should have already streamed at least a few times, and there will be more coming. I'm sure I won't be finished by the time this video comes out. You can also watch my video with my best friend Molly, discussing the music of Xenogears. She's not a gamer, but she is a musician. So I asked her to give her impressions of what the music in Xenogears is trying to say. And this outsider perspective, I'm hoping, will help me develop my theses on what the music is actually doing within the game. Most likely, I'll also be making a video with my artist friend Michael looking at the character designs in Xenogears. I'd love to bring in experts and talk about this stuff when I can. And, of course, all the usual stuff. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe if you want to see more discussions on video games, music, and other media. If you're only interested in the video game stuff, go ahead and check out our playlists tab. There's a playlist of just video game coverage if that's all you're interested in. But I highly recommend that you check out other stuff too if you find stuff you're interested in. Up here is that video analysis video that I used for Final Fantasy VI that I discussed earlier. Down here is that playlist that I just mentioned of other video game stuff. Check both of those out if you're interested. And that's it for today. Maintain your groovy selves.